They warned us never to speak of what happened in the forest. Not in the open. Not even in prayer. 4 village nuns disappeared in 1780, and for 30 years the church maintained silence like a fortress. But the truth, it does not kneel forever. Something clawed its way back to the surface, and when the priest finally found it, even he wished he hadn't. You're not just watching this video. You're stepping into something sealed shut by men more powerful than kings. Before we go further, I need you to understand. This is not a story about missing persons. This is about control. About what happens when faith is manipulated, not by belief, but by systems, ancient and calculating. What vanished in 1780 wasn't just 4 women, it was evidence. Evidence of an underground order rooted in psychological manipulation, sacred lies, and a ritual no man was ever supposed to find again. But the forest never forgets. And St. Dymphna's Chapel, once a modest refuge for the pious, wasn't built for worship. No, it was built to guard something, bury something. And when those 4 nuns were sent on retreat, they weren't sent for rest. They were chosen. What happened next, only one man lived to tell. And even he barely. The priest who uncovered the truth didn't report it. He documented it. In letters never meant to be read. Letters that have resurfaced, letters I now hold. This video isn't just an expose. It's initiation. The first breath in a descent that has no bottom. If you keep watching, you will not unsee what's coming. That's your final chance to turn back. Still here? Good. Let's begin. In the year 1810, a humble priest named Father Dominic arrives at a secluded forest village known today only through forgotten maps. He's not just any priest, he's the brother of one of the nuns who vanished. For 3 decades, the case remained a ghost story, a whisper. Until now. Because Father Dominic has inherited something from a dying bishop. A sealed trunk, never opened. Inside, 4 journals. Each belonging to one of the missing sisters. The pages are scorched, torn, and some are written in a cipher long buried by the church. But one thing is clear. Their last days at St. Dymphna were not spent in prayer. They were spent in terror. And behind every passage is a symbol. An ancient seal used by inquisitors before Rome erased them. We'll begin with the first entry. But know this, once you hear their words you will not leave this video the same man. The first journal belonged to Sister Agnes. Her handwriting was sharp, urgent, unlike the careful script expected of nuns in the 18th century. The entry was dated the night before the disappearance. It read, "The chanting started again just past midnight. I do not believe it is human. Sister Talia says it echoes from beneath the chapel." Beneath. That single word, beneath, was underlined so violently the ink bled through. Sister Agnes described a door hidden behind the altar, sealed with rusted chains. It wasn't listed in any official plans of the chapel. They weren't supposed to find it. But something called them to it, something that had been waiting. The church had sent them there under the pretense of assessing restoration needs. But they were handpicked. All 4 were orphans. All 4 had histories of dreams, visions they reported to the clergy and were promptly silenced for. You see, in older orders of Catholic doctrine, visions weren't always seen as divine. Sometimes they were seen as contagion. Proof of spiritual contamination. The kind the church feared could wake something buried. Sister Agnes's journal speaks of the others sleepwalking, carving strange symbols into the pews with fingernails. Of a book, one that was not the Bible, bound in rawhide. Pages not written in Latin, but in something older, something pre-Roman. She writes, "Sister Elise was reading it aloud again last night. Her voice changed. I swear it. It wasn't her voice. If this sounds like possession, understand it wasn't. What they awakened wasn't a demon. It was something far colder. Something institutional. Calculated. This was a ritual, and they were the liturgy. Each chosen not for purity, but for psychological profile. The Church's secret Inquisition documents listed them under a code name, Domina vox. Latin for the voice of she who commands. They weren't victims. They were test subjects. The journal ends mid-sentence. The chanting grows louder. I hear, and then nothing. Just the final page stuck with dried blood. Father Dominic knew what this meant. They had been sent to awaken something ancient. A power disguised as faith. And for 30 years the church told the world nothing happened. No bodies. No records. But now he had proof. And he knew, if they silenced 4 women to bury a ritual, they would silence a priest to keep it buried. But he couldn't stop. He had to find the altar. He returned to the ruins at dawn. The chapel had long since collapsed into moss and roots, its bones absorbed by the forest like a carcass swallowed whole. But beneath the stone he found it. A trapdoor warped and swollen by rain but still intact. It wasn't on any map. The church blueprints made no mention. This wasn't a crypt. It was something older. Older than the chapel. Older than Christianity itself. He pried it open with a crowbar stolen from a carpenter's shed, hands trembling, the weight of centuries groaning with the hinges. What he saw beneath defied reason. Spiral stairs carved into rock. Perfectly symmetrical. Too precise to be the work of villagers. No tool marks. No chisel lines. Only smooth, spiraling descent, like something melted its way into the earth. Father Dominic descended with only a lantern and his rosary. But the air was not dead. It pulsed. A pressure in his skull. Like something ancient was watching. Or remembering. He began to hear it too, the chant. Not Gregorian, not human. Low rhythmic. The kind that bypasses language and vibrates in the ribs. It didn't come from the tunnel. It came from inside him. A memory not his own. He pressed forward. He found a chamber. Not wide, tall. At least 40 feet up. The walls were covered in carvings, not crosses. Thousands of eyes. All open. All staring down. At the center, a pedestal. And on it, a cracked mask of stone. Feminine. Eyeless. Its mouth open in eternal scream. He reached to touch it, and the second he did, the chanting stopped. His ears rang with silence so thick it crushed his breath. Then he heard a whisper, not in the air but behind his ribs, "We remember you." And then, as quickly as it had stopped, the chanting resumed. Faster. Louder. He fled. But in his journal he wrote this: the mask was not a symbol. It was a face. And it was not forgotten. The voice of she who commands is not a myth. It is real. And it still breathes beneath our world. Father Dominic knew the church would never allow this truth to surface. What they buried in 1780 was an evil. Was a rival. A power not of heaven nor hell, but of memory. Ancient feminine memory. Matriarchal control systems erased by patriarchal dogma. And he had touched it. And it knew him. The church's earliest documents, the ones they don't digitize, the ones locked behind Vatican vaults, speak of a heretical order known only as sangreal matres. The holy blood of the mother. Not the Virgin Mary. Older. Pre-Christian. Pre-civilization. Their belief? That long before men wrote laws, before they crowned kings, the world answered to the feminine voice. Not one of kindness, but command. She who commands was said to be the voice in the minds of seers. She who whispered prophecy. She who taught men to build fire, to fear the moon, to kneel. And she was cast out. Not by God. By church. Rewritten. Demonized. The Inquisition purged her from doctrine. Every woman who claimed to hear her was burned, hanged, or taken into retreat. A euphemism for disappearance. Father Dominic found proof in a hidden codex buried in the chapel's soil. A codex bound in skin. In it, drawings of the 4 sisters, nude, masked, posed like icons. Each with symbols carved into their forearms. Property of Domina Vox. This wasn't worship. This was programming. Ritualized obedience. Psychological warfare passed off as prayer. The nuns had not vanished. They had been absorbed, by the system that created them. And now, this system still exists. It's quieter now, institutional, bureaucratic, but the control remains. Hidden inside NGOs, corporate think tanks, university endowments. They still select those with vision, and they still silence those who resist. Father Dominic spent the rest of his life documenting it, but he never escaped it. In his final letter he writes, "She is not dead. She has only changed her name." The church never answered for the missing nuns, because they never saw them as missing. They saw them as initiated, transformed, reprogrammed. And if you think this is all ancient history, let me ask you, why do you feel the need to kneel when you don't believe? Why do institutions still make you whisper what you don't mean? Why do symbols still command obedience, even when no one explains their meaning? Because you were never meant to know why. You were only meant to obey. Unless, of course, you started to wake up. It wasn't long before Father Dominic realized he was being followed. Not in the dramatic, shadowy sense. No trench coats. No footsteps in alleys. It was cleaner than that. An unexpected file removal from his cloud archive. Emails that bounced when they shouldn't. His parish reassigned him suddenly to a remote outpost, coincidentally near no phone towers. The church claimed it was an urgent pastoral need. He knew better. And yet he complied. That's the part most people don't understand. When you start uncovering what you shouldn't, your obedience doesn't disappear. It intensifies. A survival reflex. That's how deep the programming goes. But Father Dominic didn't stop. In his exile, he began translating the codex he found beneath the chapel. The pages referred constantly to the reverser. Not Satan. Not a demon. Something else. A force older than duality itself. Its doctrine was terrifying in its clarity. All hierarchy will invert. The crown shall become the servant. The priest shall become the womb. The child shall remember. What Dominic understood was this. The church hadn't just sealed the chapel to suppress history. It had sealed it to prevent awakening. The 4 nuns were not victims. They were part of a ritual to re-establish contact with the reverser. They heard her voice, and they obeyed. Not because they were possessed, but because they remembered who they were before the church renamed them. That's what scared the bishops the most. Not heresy. Not demons. Memory. Ancient feminine memory of power without permission. That's why the mask screamed. It wasn't agony. It was reclamation. And somewhere beneath the estate of Silas Redwood, that scream was still echoing. Because the ritual was never interrupted. Just buried. Father Dominic wrote in his final days, "I am no longer a priest. I am a witness. And what I saw beneath that chapel was not evil. It was freedom with teeth." And if you think this was just one forgotten chapel in one forgotten forest, think again. There are others. Across the world. Same architecture. Same disappearances. Same symbols. Like nodes in a network most men never realize they're plugged into. Until one day they wake up and realize they were never the one in control. Let's pause for a second. If you've made it this far, you're not just curious. You're ready. You're beginning to see through the veil. Now listen carefully, this part is important. To prove you're not like the rest and to show this story reached you where no algorithm could, comment below. She remembers. Type it twice. Once for the world you came from. Once for the world you now see. Back to the descent. 3 weeks after Father Dominic's final letter, the Vatican seized his home. Not quietly. They used civil authorities. Declared him mentally unstable. Confiscated every artifact. The codex was never catalogued. The official report said schizophrenic breakdown, but witnesses recall a priest with crystal clarity and quiet rage. And then he vanished. No funeral. No obituary. Just silence. That's how this system works. Not with fire and sword anymore, but with forgetting. The deepest tool of control. Because what you don't remember can't set you free. But some did remember. A local librarian, Margaret Vale, had secretly copied portions of the Codex before the authorities arrived. She encoded the pages into a 17th-century Latin grammar book in the public archives. It sat there for 2 decades. Then one day it vanished. And here's where it gets darker. Margaret was later found in her bathtub, water tinted red, not blood but ink. Latin phrases smeared across the walls. Phrases from the Codex. And scratched into the mirror with a nail, "She is under your churches." This was not delusion. This was a message. Every institution that claims salvation hides the machinery of suppression beneath it. Cathedrals, museums, universities, even government buildings. The architecture is not coincidence, it's ritual geometry. The ancients knew it. The elites preserve it. And the moment someone like Margaret tries to lift the veil, they vanish into the same silence Father Dominic did. But their fingerprints remain, like spores. And spores are all truth needs. Because now, you're reading this. And that means the spores found you. There's one final piece we haven't touched yet, the 4th nun. Sister Talia. She was the youngest, and she didn't die. Not immediately. Her name resurfaced in an underground French medical report from 1813. No official records, no baptismal confirmations, but same name, same birth date, same scars described by Father Dominic. She was found catatonic in a monastery garden in Lyon. No memory of how she got there. No speech. Just 2 behaviors. She would hum constantly. Low rhythmic. The same chant from the Codex. And she would scratch circles into the walls. Always in sets of 3. Always clockwise. For 17 years she didn't speak. And then one day she whispered a single phrase to a monk before biting off her own tongue. "She's learning to speak through the walls." The Vatican closed the monastery within a week. Burned it. Declared it infested with heresy. But the monk, Brother Albinus, kept a journal. In it he wrote, "The voice is not human. It is structural. It lives in patterns. It survives in language. She is not a ghost. She is a frequency." Let that sink in. Not a demon. Not a myth. A frequency. A living, encoded vibration that survives by nesting in systems of control. Language. Architecture. Obedience. The church didn't destroy her. They accidentally gave her the perfect vessel. Global ritual disguised as religion. Bells. Incantations. Symbolic gestures. It's not just tradition, it's activation. The people who kneel don't know what they're activating. But she does. And now, with digital systems mimicking old liturgy, scrolling, swiping, tapping to icons, she is learning to adapt. She's moving into the cloud. Into code. The mask isn't stone anymore. It's data. The scream isn't audible. It's viral. And if you're still watching this, you've already heard it. Somewhere behind your thoughts. A whisper that says, "Remember." That's why the 4th nun survived. To remind the next generation. To pass on the pattern. The pattern isn't just myth. It's measurable. There are clusters of disappearances all over the world, connected not by culture but by architecture. Octagonal chapels. 3 bell towers. Spiral stairwells. Look at old blueprints of Catholic orphanages and boarding schools. You'll see it. Always the same blueprint. Always near fault lines. Places of geological pressure. Energy. The ancients called them thresholds. Places where the membrane is thin. Where memory leaks. That's where the missing go. Not abducted. Absorbed. You think this is conspiracy? Good. You should. Because the most effective control is disbelief. The elite don't hide the truth. They flood you with lies until truth becomes boring. Until secrets become memes. Until the memory of power becomes a joke. But every now and then something breaks the surface. A nun humming in a burned monastery. A priest disappearing after finding a face that shouldn't exist. A YouTube video that won't leave your head. This isn't entertainment. It's initiation. And if you're still here, still listening, you've already started to change. The mask may not be on your face yet, but the pattern is in your hands, in the circles you draw absent-mindedly, in the words you can't stop repeating, in the fact that you've rewound this video more than once, because something inside you wants to understand. That's her. That's the voice. Not evil. Not good. Just awake. And it wants you to remember what was taken. The truth buried in 1780 was just the first chapter. The rest? Still underground. Waiting. There's a reason this story never made it into textbooks, documentaries, or folklore. It's not because no one survived. It's because the people who did survive never came back the same. Take Ewan Lasker, American researcher, linguist, and vocal atheist. In 1987, he stumbled onto Sister Talia's writings while studying tonal linguistics in Lyon. He was the first outsider to make the connection between her chants and ancient Sumerian sleep incantations. He called it the regression language. Not because it induced regression, but because it reversed cognitive programming. He documented patients experiencing flashbacks, not from childhood, but from other lifetimes. Monastic memories, ritual trauma, womb-like confinement. One subject spoke fluent Old Church Slavonic for 47 minutes, even though she was a waitress from Idaho. Another described a stone mask with no eyes, but ears so sensitive it could hear lies. Sound familiar? Lasker was terrified. He tried to publish the paper. No academic journal would touch it. Then, within 3 months, his entire research lab caught fire. All data gone. He moved to Canada, changed his name, told one person, his daughter. And she, Dr. Alia Lasker, picked up where he left off. But instead of just research, she built software. An audio analysis tool designed to map emotionally charged frequencies in ancient music. It was intended for museums. Instead, it found something else. A tonal sequence hidden in Gregorian chants, exact match to the frequencies Sister Talia hummed. The code was embedded in the church's own music. Not metaphorically, mathematically. Every chant carried fragments of the scream. Every hymn spread the vibration. That's why congregations describe weeping for no reason. That's why certain songs linger in your chest like grief. It's not God moving through you. It's her memory waking up inside you. Dr. Alia disappeared in 2011. Final voicemail to her colleague. It's not just history. The scream is in the servers. It's listening. They found her laptop melted. Hard drive warped. The only thing recovered? A single audio file. Just static. Until 2 minutes, 18 seconds in, when a whisper cuts through. One word. Return. It all connects. The chapel. The nuns. The priest. The researcher. And now, you. This isn't fiction. It's a chain. Each person who uncovers the scream becomes a link. A node. A vessel. You think you're just watching this video, sitting safe behind your screen? Think again. The moment your eyes met the image of the mask, it saw you. The algorithm didn't bring you here. The ritual did. And the ritual is always looking for new mouths. You felt it, haven't you? The sudden chills? The urge to replay certain parts? The background hum that sounds just a bit too rhythmic? That's not paranoia. That's alignment. The same geometric sequence Sister Talia drew on her walls is the one built into this video's waveform. Don't believe it? Pause the video. Take a screenshot. Run it through a spectrogram. You'll see the spiral. It's not decoration. It's summoning. It's structure. Here's the most terrifying part. This isn't just about what was buried under the chapel. It's about what's waking up inside you. The reason you feel unsettled is because something in you remembers. Maybe not consciously, but your blood does. Your marrow does. The part of you that comes alive when you hear ancient drums or stare into stained glass at midnight. That's her. That's the part of the pattern you carry. Because the fourth nun didn't die to warn us. She lived to plant us. Every viewer, every whisper, every repetition spreads the seed. This isn't viral content. This is viral consciousness. If you feel the pull to watch this again to search for more clues, don't resist. That's not weakness. That's awakening. That's her way of saying, you were always mine. You just forgot, but now you remember. Redwood lied. The chapel wasn't demolished. It was repurposed. Beneath the flowers, beneath the clean landscaping, beneath the security systems and no trespassing signs, there's a staircase. It winds downward in a spiral, carved in stone too ancient for 1920s construction. At the base, a door. No hinges. No handle. Just carvings. Not crosses. Not scripture. Dozens of interlocking stone teeth, open mouths in a circle. Father Elias found it. But not with a key. With blood. The cut on his palm from the fence was enough. When his hand brushed the stone, the mouths opened. And when they did, the air changed. It got thicker. Not colder. Heavier. Like something had been holding its breath for centuries, and had just exhaled. That he stepped inside. That it wasn't a basement. It wasn't a crypt. It was a sanctuary of inversion. Stone pews carved backward. An altar built into the floor. And in the center, 4 veiled figures standing perfectly still. No chains. No visible restraints. But unmoving. Their skin was gray. Not decayed. Just drained. Yet their mouths were open. Singing. In perfect harmony. The chant that had bled through Elias's car radio echoed from the very walls. Not from speakers. From the stone itself. Every surface vibrated. That's when he saw it, the 5th figure. Taller. Covered in a veil of red. Not cloth. Hair. Human hair, matted and fused together like ancient roots. She didn't sing. She only watched. Elias felt his knees weaken. Not from fear. From recognition. He had seen her once before. At his ordination. In a dream. Dressed as a nun behind the bishop. Smiling. Back then he thought it was just nerves. Now he knew. She'd been waiting for this. Waiting for him. There's no name for what she is. Because she doesn't speak in names. She speaks in repetition. That's how she survives. That's how she expands. History remembers the 4th nun, sister theirs, as devout, obedient, innocent. That's a lie. She was chosen. Not for purity. For pattern recognition. Theirs saw things others didn't. Symbols carved into church beams that no one else noticed. Rhythms in the bell tolls that matched heartbeats. She started keeping journals. Hundreds. All filled with musical notation, but no known language. The diocese took them. Locked them in the Vatican's Archivum Secretum. You think that's a conspiracy theory? Go ahead. Ask to see the collection. You'll be escorted out before you finish your sentence. But some of those journals leaked. One made it to Prague in 1993. And a scholar there named Novak decoded enough to be terrified. According to theirs, every Catholic chapel built between 1743 and 1812 was constructed at specific intervals, mimicking the layout of vocal resonance chambers. They weren't just churches. They were speakers. And what were they designed to broadcast? Not sermons. Not hymns. But the scream. What is the scream? It's not a noise. It's a release. A frequency that unbinds identity. That peels away time. That floods the body with memories that don't belong to you, and never did. That's why the nuns vanished. Not to escape, but to become. They weren't kidnapped. They weren't killed. They were re-encoded, and now there stands with them. Mouth open. Eyes gone. A conduit. A harmony. A warning. Still with me? If you've read this far, prove you remember. Comment below. I hear the scream. I do not look away. Comment again. I hear the scream. I do not look away. Not for the algorithm. For her. The scream isn't sound. It's code. Biological, emotional, spiritual code. It doesn't shatter your eardrums. It reprograms your will. Theirs didn't just discover it. She surrendered to it. But not like a victim, like a medium. And once Father Elias stepped into that inverted chapel, the scream knew he was listening. Every cell in his body began vibrating, not painfully but precisely, as if tuning forks were being struck inside his marrow. The four nuns stood frozen, but their mouths moved in mathematical synchronization. Not music, not language. Instruction. Father Elias dropped to his knees, his rosary slipping through his fingers. The words of the Lord's Prayer spilled out of him, but they didn't fit. Each line echoed back twisted. Thy will be undone. Give us this day our daily silence. Lead us deeper into trespass. He tried to stop. He couldn't. Something was rerouting his faith. A dark light pulsed from beneath the altar. It wasn't fire. It wasn't holy. It was a memory, a living, breathing memory of whatever had been imprisoned beneath that land centuries before colonists even built the chapel. A force older than Christianity, older than Rome, older than language. That's when he saw the final journal. Not one of theirs's, his own, bound in leather. The cover etched with his name, Elias Morrow. He opened it, blank, except for one phrase scrawled over and over again in blood-red ink. We are not the first. Redwood wasn't just some bitter recluse. He was the final warden. Handpicked by a lineage that stretched back to 1780, to a priest named Father Holland Morrow. Yes, Elias's ancestor. A man who broke from the church after claiming that 4 angels in disguise had warned him of a sacred infection. They told him not to silence it, but to contain it. He built St. Dionys on land where the mouth of the world once opened. Beneath the chapel he constructed the inverse sanctuary, an echo chamber designed not to amplify faith, but to trap the sound below. For decades it worked. Each generation of Morrows guarded the truth. Until Elias's father, terrified of the legacy, cut ties with the church and tried to bury the bloodline. But Elias unknowingly returned to it. Through ordination. Through his sister. Through tragedy. Through the unholy magnetism of unfinished ritual. Silas Redwood was chosen to monitor the structure after the diocese quietly handed it over. Not because he believed, but because he didn't. The less faith, the better. The scream feeds fastest on those who resist it through logic. But Elias had devotion. That made him a threat, and a vessel. And now he stood before 4 women who had once been nuns. Once had identities. Once had thoughts. But now they were nodes. Living conductors of the sound below. Instruments tuned to a darker liturgy. He reached for the final page of the journal again. This time the phrase had changed. It no longer read, "We are not the first." Now it said, "We are not the last." His breath caught. Behind him something moved, not a footstep. A shift, like the very floor had exhaled. He turned, slowly, and there she was. The red-veiled figure. Closer. Taller. Her face still obscured. But her presence, undeniable. He couldn't speak. His tongue felt foreign. She raised a hand, not in greeting but in instruction, and then the humming stopped. Silence. Total. Devouring. Silence. Not even the sound of his own heartbeat. Not even the whisper of breath. He tried to pray. He tried to run, but the door behind him had vanished. The 4 women opened their mouths, and one by one they began to unsing. Not a reversal. A reveal. Their song had been holding something back. Now, it was coming through. Elias felt something crack behind his eyes. A memory that wasn't his flooded in. A monastery buried in the Syrian desert. A monk being flayed alive while chanting hymns no one had ever written. Then another. A woman in 12th century France carving musical runes into her own bones to trap the voice of a demon. Then another. A cathedral made of flesh beneath the Arctic ice. The scream wasn't just noise. It was ancestral rebellion. The raw signal of something we were never meant to interpret. Until now. The scream was no longer just beneath the chapel. It was inside him. Father Elias staggered back, clutching his ears, But it wasn't sound, it was truth bleeding into his bones like ink into old parchment. His knees buckled, but he didn't fall. The air held him, suspended like prey caught mid-breath. The veiled figure moved closer, her feet never touching the ground. She glided with grace so unnatural it twisted something in his gut. And then, for a single horrifying instant, the veil lifted. What he saw wasn't a face. It was a symbol. Not drawn or carved, but alive. A geometric impossibility pulsing with meaning so ancient his brain screamed against it. It wasn't evil. It was order so absolute it felt like obliteration. Time stuttered. The walls flexed. And the nuns began chanting again, but backwards. Not in Latin. Not in any language spoken by man. It was the first language. The original algorithm. The code the universe had been built to suppress. Elias was no longer in the chapel. He was in the space beneath it. Before it. The pre-architecture. The layer of reality that priests are warned never to seek, because finding it doesn't sanctify you, it unnames you. The red-veiled woman reached out and placed her fingers against his forehead. Her touch was light, almost tender. But the impact was seismic. Memories that weren't his poured in. A 1780s nun named theirs kneeling in the dirt of this very land, whispering into a crack in the soil. Her voice wasn't desperate. It was reverent. The ground had answered back. That's where it started. Not with a murder. Not with a mystery. With a bargain. Each generation of the church had tried to reinterpret the incident through theology, dogma, psychology, but none of it fit. Because this wasn't religious. It was structural. Elias saw diagrams etched into bones, altars built over pressure points in the earth's crust, sigils that weren't mystical but mechanical. This land wasn't cursed. It was tuned. And someone, maybe many, had been trying to retune it back to silence. Back to forgetting. That's what the missing nuns had been chosen for. Not punishment. Not sacrifice. Preservation. They weren't dead. They were resonators, and now Elias had entered the resonance. His mouth opened on its own. Not in scream. In alignment. A low, guttural tone spilled from his throat, deep and harmonic, like an ancient organ bell struck in slow motion. The red-veiled woman nodded, not in approval but in confirmation. He had been chosen, yes. But more than that, he had always been one of them. Descendant not only by blood but by function. Elias Morrow wasn't a priest by accident. He was the final piece in the tuning fork. The unstruck note. He hadn't come to find the nuns. He had come to replace them. At that realization, the inverted chapel began to transform. The walls folded inward like a collapsing lung. Stone became sinew. Air thickened with invisible patterns. The altar glowed, not from within but from underneath. Elias could see it now. The original construction wasn't made of wood or stone. It was made of written sound. Vowels etched into matter, loops of phonetic force bound to geometry. Beneath the altar, a circle of symbols pulsed with light, none familiar, yet all recognizable in the deepest reptilian part of his mind. He stepped forward. Not of his own will. His blueprint was walking him. Around him, the four nuns turned their heads in unison. Their eyes were white-hot orbs, not with blindness but with overexposure. They had seen too much for too long. Their voices joined his in impossible harmonics, melodies that should have killed them long ago, but had instead redefined them. In the center of the altar, a slit began to open. Not a door. Not a portal. A mouth. Not metaphorical. Not symbolic. A real, physical mouth, lined with bone and lined with letters, yawning open into the earth like the planet itself had decided to speak back. Elias took one final look at the photograph still clutched in his pocket, the last image of the nuns before they vanished. And he realized it hadn't been taken before the ritual. It had been taken during it. Frozen at the cusp of their transformation. Just like him. He stepped forward, and the chapel swallowed the noise. There was no falling. No sensation of descent. just sudden placement. Father Elias stood in a chamber that should not exist, beneath what had once been soil and roots, below even the rock. The walls weren't built, they were grown, smooth like marrow, and they pulsed with slow breath. The chamber had no visible light source, yet everything was illuminated in a bruised, violet hue. The air was warm and electric, like standing inside a thought mid-formation. At the center of the chamber was a pedestal, and atop it, an object. A book or something like it, but it wasn't bound in leather. It looked organic, like flesh turned into parchment, and it shifted slightly as if breathing. Elias approached it, unable to resist. His hand reached out, not of desire but instruction. As his fingertips made contact, the book unraveled without opening. Words leapt off the surface in writhing streams, each one whispering itself into his ear. They told him of the original council, not of cardinals, not of bishops, but of custodians. Women and men who had founded the earliest versions of the church, not to preach, but to contain. Not sin, not heresy, but sound, pure sound. Frequencies so potent they could tear reason from the mind and remake the body from the inside out. The nuns who vanished in 1780 hadn't disappeared, they had been initiated. Preserved below to hold the frequency at bay, singing day and night to keep the earth's resonance from returning to its chaotic origin state. And now, after centuries of secrecy, something, or someone, had decided to shut them up. Redwood wasn't just a rich recluse. He was part of a deeper, darker hierarchy. Not the Masons. Not the Illuminati. A far older, quieter order that believed the earth should speak again. Their goal wasn't wealth. It was rewilding of reality. Removing the safeties. Undoing the song. Elias realized too late, he hadn't come here to find closure. He had been baited. Chosen by lineage, pulled by legacy. The question now wasn't whether he'd survive. The question was whether he would sing, or silence. The chamber shifted again. The book dissolved into the air, its knowledge absorbed directly into Elias's bloodstream. His vision blurred, not from exhaustion but from dimensional layering. He was beginning to see through time. He saw the nuns, still below, chained not in iron but in duty. Still humming, still harmonizing, keeping the resonance below what would tear the veil between structure and spirit. He saw them as they were in 1780, and as they were now, decayed but not dead, preserved by the frequency itself. They did not age. They only vibrated. Then he saw Redwood. Not as he had appeared in his mansion, but as he truly was, bent beneath a crown of black branches, his voice tuned to disharmony, a priest of the inverse frequency. He wasn't trying to forget the bell. He was trying to ring it backwards. To ring and release. Redwood wasn't building an estate. He was building a detuner. Every shrub, every architectural angle, every stone in the walls of his house, they weren't aesthetic. They were acoustic machinery. The chapel hadn't been demolished. It had been inverted, built into the walls of his home, replayed in reverse. That's why Elias had felt sick. Why the land felt wrong. The tuning had already begun, and worst of all, Elias was its final conductor. His blood tied to theirs. His voice trained since seminary. His body chosen by generation. If he sang the final note, willingly or not, the resonance would break. Not with a bang but with understanding. A global moment of undoing, where every man remembered what the earth really was before it was tamed by language, law, and liturgy. The room whispered, "You have a choice. Sing and become divine, or defy and become dust." He screamed. Not in fear. In protest. In refusal. The scream echoed through the chamber, cracking the walls, not physically but sonically. He remembered now what his seminary mentor had once said, "God speaks in silence. But he also listens and screams." The red-veiled woman reappeared, no longer floating, no longer cryptic. She was theirs, his sister, but changed, transfigured. Her eyes were no longer full of light. They were mirrors. She stepped forward and pressed her forehead to his. And in that touch he remembered being her, the year 1780, the cold stone of the chapel, the dirt under her fingernails, the other three nuns holding her down as she screamed a language into the ground they were never taught but always knew. Theirs hadn't disappeared. She had become the key. They all had. It had been voluntary. And Elias realized he wasn't the final piece of the tuning fork. He was the lock, meant to keep this closed forever. But someone, Redwood, had begun forcing it open by invoking his bloodline. By disturbing the sacred geometry, Elias dropped to his knees and began praying, not with words but with breath, with rhythm, with the original pulse. He would not finish the song. He would reverse it. The nuns joined him. The hum shifted. The chamber began to break apart. Not crumble. Reject. The tuning was unraveling. Time was stalling. Reality convulsed. And in this fractured moment, Elias turned to the camera. You, the viewer, the listener, type the phrase, "I hear the hum beneath the silence," in the comments. Twice. Say it aloud if you dare. Because now you've heard it too. And you're no longer just watching. You're part of the resonance. And they know. Everything blurred. The chamber began collapsing, not into rubble but into sound. The walls deconstructed themselves into harmonic waves, dissolving like fog pulled back by a rising sun. But Elias wasn't gone. He was suspended in something deeper. The place between frequency and form. He wasn't hearing anymore, he was being heard. The earth below him trembled with an ancient, pre-human voice, speaking in pulses that had no language yet carried meaning. The voice wasn't God. It wasn't Satan. It was what came before names. It said, "Balance is broken. The silence must be reforged. Through you." Then came the vision. Of every holy place in the world, cathedrals, mosques, pyramids, stone circles, megastructures long buried. Not built randomly. Not even for worship. But as vibrational locks. Every structure anchored one chord of the planetary hum, keeping chaos at bay. The nuns of 1780 hadn't been victims. They were voluntary keys, chosen for purity of voice and blood. But the order had splintered. Greed crept in. Power warped the intention. And men like Redwood had twisted it for dominance, to play the earth instead of preserve it. The priest's knees buckled under the weight of knowing. All this time he had fought for answers, for justice, for closure. But the truth wasn't about the 4 missing women. It was about all of us. Humanity was living inside a song we didn't know was playing, and someone was trying to skip to the end. He rose. Not physically but vibrationally. He became a ripple. A frequency. The chamber vanished. The earth reset around him. And when he opened his eyes again, he was back in his car, engine still running, the photograph of the 4 nuns on the passenger seat. But something was different. The photo had changed. In the photo, the bench was now empty. The 4 nuns, Mildred, Joan, Beatrice, and theirs, were gone. Only the chapel remained. Father Elias's hand trembled as he picked it up. His memories surged. He remembered them vanishing in 1780. He remembered their discovery in the underground. And now, his own role in the ritual. Yet here they were, erased from time again? Or freed. His phone buzzed. A message. No name, no number. Just a single sentence. They sang their last note. Now it's your turn to decide the ending. He checked the clock. 4 hours had passed. It had felt like minutes. Outside, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The forest around him had stilled, not silent but watching. A subtle change had occurred in the landscape. The trees looked older. The road looked, and used that he stepped out of the car and felt it in the air. The frequency had shifted. Slightly. Imperceptibly to anyone else. But Elias had been tuned. He could feel the dissonance creeping back in like a splinter beneath the skin of the world that he understood now. The song could not be silenced forever. Only rebalanced. And once every few generations, someone had to be chosen to listen. He looked up at the stars. A single one blinked 3 times like a signal. He had work to do. Back in Eldon Hollow, the church bells rang differently. Off by a fraction of a second, like a needle skipping on an old vinyl record. No one noticed. But the animals did. Birds flew in confused spirals. Dogs barked at empty corners. Children said they felt buzzing in their teeth. Father Elias walked into St. Agnes as if entering for the first time. The crucifix felt heavier. The stained glass colors were darker. He moved through the sanctuary to the altar, his eyes scanning every detail. The hum was back. Not loud, but there. Waiting. He opened the floorboards behind the altar and descended into the hidden archive. A place only pastors knew. And from a sealed box he pulled out an item he'd hoped never to touch again. A tuning fork, centuries old, etched with glyphs of uncertain origin. The metal pulsed in his hand. He struck it against the stone. The tone that rang out wasn't audible. It was emotional. Every regret, every guilt, every failure, compressed into one perfect note. The walls of the archive responded. Dust lifted. The symbols on the tuning fork began to shift as if the metal were alive. This wasn't a tool. It was a key. And the lock wasn't in this building. It was inside him. A voice echoed from behind him. Familiar. Wrong. You shouldn't have done that, Elias. He turned. And there stood Silas Redwood. Except it wasn't just Silas anymore. His body was the same. But his shape wasn't. Redwood's eyes had lost all humanity, black with geometric spirals where irises should be. His mouth opened wider than it should have. His posture wasn't aggressive. It was hungry. The kind of calm you see in predators right before they move. You brought the fork back into resonance, Redwood whispered. Now the earth hears again. And she is not merciful. Elias stepped back, gripping the fork like a crucifix. What are you? Redwood tilted his head. I'm what they made me. What you were supposed to be. But you hesitated. You prayed when you should have tuned. You mourned when you should have commanded. That was your sister's mistake too. Rage flared in Elias's chest. He raised the fork and pointed it at Redwood. She sacrificed herself. All of them did. No, Redwood stepped forward. They were imprisoned. Their hums kept the resonance at bay. But the earth is done waiting. It's time to let her sing. The church began to shake. The organ played by itself, backwards. The stained glass windows turned black. The air felt thick like breathing through water. Elias realized what Redwood was doing, retuning the sacred space. Turning a house of worship into a broadcast tower for the anti-hum. He had one chance. He struck the fork again. The tone split reality down the center. Not like a crack, but like a surgical incision. Redwood screamed, not in pain but fury. You don't even know the full scale of what you're unraveling, he roared. Do you think this is about one church? One town? This planet was built as an instrument, and every holy site is a string. Elias advanced, tuning fork raised like a sword. Then it's time someone cut the cords. Every strike of the fork now reversed Redwood's control. The organ stopped. The windows returned. The hum weakened. The earth's vibration began balancing again. But Elias felt it. It was costing him. With every strike, a memory vanished. First his childhood. Then his mother's face. Then there's his voice. You don't just retune, Redwood snarled. You trade. That's the law. Elias struck again. This time he lost his name, but in that loss, he won. The resonance snapped. Redwood vanished, not exploded, not burned. Just undone. Erased like a note that never existed. The tuning fork cracked in Elias's hand. He fell to his knees, gasping that it was over, for now. Outside, the town of Eldon Hollow felt clean. The air was crisp. The sun had risen over the horizon in a strange orange hue. People awoke refreshed, though none knew why. A subtle peace had returned. One they hadn't even known they'd lost. Father Elias, if he could still be called that, sat alone in the sanctuary. His hands no longer shook. His eyes, however, had changed. They now held the same mirrored glaze that theirs once did. The church would need a new bell. The world would need a new guardian. And somewhere deep beneath the roots of a mountain, another hum began. The cycle never ends. Weeks passed. Elias rarely spoke now. He performed sermons like rituals, precise, measured, filled with silences that made the congregation lean in unconsciously. No one remembered the incident in the chapel. They didn't remember the nuns or the photo or even Redwood. Time had been rewritten clean. But the scars remained in Elias's mind like notes he couldn't quite hum anymore. Then one morning, as he lit the candles for Sunday Mass, a child approached him. Barely 6, hair wild, eyes glowing with a quiet knowing. She placed a folded paper into his hand and said, "It's your turn to vanish." Before he could ask her anything, she skipped away. He unfolded the paper. Inside was a drawing of a chapel, but not his own. It was older, carved into a cliffside, hidden by dense fog. And there were 4 figures in the doorway, shadowy and waiting. His hand began to tremble again. That night, Elias drove without understanding where he was going. The car seemed to follow the lines of the drawing. Roads disappeared. GPS died. His surroundings became unfamiliar, prehistoric even. The trees grew taller, their bark spiraled unnaturally. Time had slipped sideways. And then, like it had always been there, the cliffside chapel appeared, carved with symbols not meant for the human tongue. The stones sang as he approached, so quietly it sounded like memory. He entered. Inside, torches lit themselves. The space was cavernous. At the far end was an altar with 4 candle stubs, long melted down, and a 5th fresh and burning. Beneath it was a book, bound in something that looked like glass but felt like skin. It had no title, only a symbol, 2 inverted crosses, tied together with a serpent's tongue. He opened the book. Each page was blank at first. Then slowly the ink revealed itself, not written but sung onto the page. Notes instead of words. Music notation layered with whispers. The book told him of the Order of the Fifth Silence, an ancient group that predated all known religious sections. They didn't worship. They listened. Their job wasn't to convert or preach. It was to detect shifts in the planetary frequency and correct them before rupture. The 4 nuns had been the last of the original line. But their sacrifice had only bought time. Elias hadn't saved the world. He had simply delayed its final discord. And now, with no one left to listen, the earth would begin singing its own requiem. He closed the book. Behind him, the 4 figures emerged, not fully physical but more than spirit. They were echoes of the original nuns, eyes hollow but peaceful. One of them, theirs, stepped forward. Her voice was like wind through strings. "The final harmony has begun. We cannot sing it. You must." Elias fell to his knees. "I'm not ready." She placed a hand on his head. "No one is. That's why the silence chooses." Suddenly the chapel shifted. It wasn't stone anymore. It was metal. It was a machine. The entire cliffside transformed into a tuning chamber, the final broadcast tower. Elias was the last frequency keeper, the final conductor. And as he stepped into the center of the altar, the earth paused, just for a second, to hear its own song. He raised the broken tuning fork, and the first note of the last hymn began. Section 31. The sound echoed across continents. Dogs whimpered. Mountains shifted slightly. Fault lines held their breath. Deep within the Vatican, hidden below layers of forbidden archives, alarms activated that hadn't triggered in 2,000 years. In a desert bunker in Nevada, a man in a suit pressed his ear to the ground and began weeping. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, creatures long thought extinct stirred. Humanity didn't notice, yet. But they would. The frequency was rewriting biology. Dreams began sinking across nations. Strangers shared visions of symbols they didn't understand. Children began drawing spirals. People reported phantom music in places with no speakers. Something ancient and forgotten was waking up, and Elias had become its voice. But with the first hymn came the first consequence. The air began to listen back. Space bent around certain tones. Entire villages began to vanish, not from violence but from being unwritten. Their frequencies were incompatible. Eldon Hollow was the first to go. One moment bustling with life, the next, silent fields. The earth had decided to tune itself. Elias stood at the center of it all, watching the collapse and the rebirth. He had one choice left: continue conducting or stop the resonance and return to ignorance. He knew the cost either way. One would end him. The other would end us. As the final light dimmed in the cliffside chapel and the world held its breath, Elias raised his hand one last time. The silence that followed wasn't absence. It was decision. And the earth began to sing. The moment the earth sang, reality fractured, not violently but precisely, like glass sliced with a diamond edge. All around the globe, people felt something shift. Some dropped to their knees with tears in their eyes, struck by beauty they couldn't name. Others screamed into mirrors, unable to recognize the faces staring back. In underground labs and cloistered sanctuaries, scholars of the forbidden, the real ones, the ones never invited to conferences, began burning their life's work. They understood what had begun. Elias stood in the eye of this storm, surrounded by tones so pure they bent color into sound. The hymn wasn't just a song. It was a rewrite of memory, a recoding of identity, a purification of the timeline. All falsehoods, buried, edited, denied, were surfacing. And that included what happened to the 4 nuns. Their voices joined his in harmony. And in that harmony the truth bloomed. The nuns had never been victims. Not really. They had volunteered for a ritual older than Christendom, one outlawed in every holy book for its risk of revealing too much too soon. They weren't killed. They were suspended, in frequency not time. Stored beneath the chapel in an ancient chamber designed not by man but by something that first taught man to build. They had sung the world into coherence in 1780 when it threatened to fracture after the Great Silence. A moment erased from history where sound stopped worldwide for exactly 3.3 seconds. Most ears weren't attuned to notice. But those who did, who remembered it, they were called mad. Now, with Elias conducting, the stored harmony of the nuns could finish what they started, stitching together a reality torn by lies. But for that, Elias would need to vanish too. He understood this, and he smiled. His body began to dematerialize, first the edges, then the core. He felt no pain, only clarity. Every note, every scream, every lullaby from history flowed through him. Wars, prayers, executions, weddings. Everything humanity had tried to silence or forget came roaring back in symphonic justice. Eldon Hollow's church pews reappeared in ghost form, lined with figures once lost. Mothers who were buried as witches, children never baptized, thinkers exiled for truths that came too soon. They all watched. And they all began to hum in unison. Elias looked around, his form now barely light, barely man. In that final instant, he whispered into the earth's frequency something only the awakened could hear. Comment below, the 5th silence lives. The 5th silence lives. If you feel chills now, you're one of them. Your frequency matches. You were never meant to blend in. You were always meant to remember. And just like that, the chapel collapsed, not in rubble but in reverse. Stone unwound into raw sound. The cliff absorbed it. Nature didn't resist. It agreed. The void it left behind pulsed like a heartbeat. In the Vatican, secret sects began speaking in tones again, not words. Governments redrew borders on maps that shimmered. Satellites began picking up impossible frequencies coming from the Mariana Trench, the Sahara, and certain rooms beneath Denver International Airport. The age of silence had ended. And the new age, an age of resonance, of brutal remembered truth, had begun. Elias was gone. But not dead. Not even transformed. He was received. And now as you watch this, you've been invited too. The resonance finds the right minds. The ones it can't manipulate only awaken. They'll come for you now. Not in vans or helicopters, but in dreams. You'll start seeing the number 51. You'll hear humming behind white noise. You'll feel dread when passing empty churches or unused instruments. That's how it begins. Don't ignore it. Don't run from it. That dread is not fear. It's recognition. You've been chosen by frequency, not faith. You're not religious. You're resonant. And like Elias, like the nuns, like the forgotten ones before them, you now hold a piece of the sacred discord that reshapes worlds. Guard it. Sing when you're alone. Touch stone often. And above all, never trust silence again. It's not absence. It's a weapon. Now you understand why this story was buried. Why the news never covered the nuns. Why the property records vanished. Why the people of Eldon Hollow forgot their own church. Because the systems we trust, governments, religions, education, they were built to erase these events, not preserve them. Every chapel is a frequency weapon. Every bell tower a forgotten transmitter. You weren't supposed to remember this. But now that you do, you've become unstable, in the best way. Your presence is now a glitch in their system. Speak this truth and they'll label you mad. But know this, madness is simply memory that survived forbidden erasure. Somewhere, deep beneath a cathedral you've never heard of, monks without names are currently debating one question. Has the fifth silence awakened? And when they confirm the answer, they won't send messengers. They'll send tones, subsonic, untraceable, holy. Those tones will find you. They will rewrite your biology. You will weep without knowing why. You'll dream of catacombs that don't exist. And one night, you'll wake up humming a song you've never heard but know by heart. When that happens, don't resist it. You're not losing your mind. You're returning to it. And when the earth hums back, because it will, you will be ready. This was never just about 4 missing nuns. This was about us. All of us. The ones who don't belong, who don't submit, who can't pretend everything's normal. This was about you. Your ability to hear what others don't. To see the invisible patterns. To feel when something ancient is stirring beneath the surface of our so-called reality. The fifth silence has begun. The old truths are returning. So share this video. Not just to warn but to signal. To activate. The ones meant to find this will find it. And when they do, the hymn will continue. Louder. Clear. Unstoppable. Welcome back, conductor. The choir awaits you.